Oh yeah, TF2 baby. You know, that game, the game we all talk about, but only like 7 of us actually play. The one that my soul is irreparably bound to until YouTube crashes and burns. Oh yeah, that game. Team Fortress 2 is actually a good game. Now that might be an ice cold caveman tier take. I mean, after all, the one thing that binds the Team Fortress 2 community together is sweaty man abs, and calling Team Fortress 2 good is something that's basically just accepted fact in this circle. That's why we play the game, and not for any other weird perverse reasons, right guys? However, and I'm about to say something that is effectively heresy, Team Fortress 2 is not perfect. In fact, it's actually quite far from perfect, and I'm not just talking about bots, I'm not just talking about a couple of bad weapons, I'm talking about certain fundamental things with the way Team Fortress 2 designed its characters that I don't as much like anymore. And they're not gonna like me saying it, but I'm just gonna say it. Medic is not as good of a character design as we have been led to believe. He's really fun to play. He's great in 6s or in Highlander, where the team sizes are more limited. And limiting the healing is a fine idea, but the impact he has on the rest of the game's design, in my opinion, is almost exclusively negative. And oh hey, look, a laser pointer. No, but jokes aside, Team Fortress has a lot of problems. The map design is absolute dog shit. In my opinion, some of the mechanics are not as good as we like to pretend that they are, especially not in casual mode. A healthy portion of the weapons either don't work or suck. Certain characters just didn't evolve like the rest of the cast did. In my opinion, there's a great deal of missed opportunities and potential subclasses that were never explored. And on top of all of this, Pyro is 34 and still doesn't have a driver's license. And I don't know about you, but whenever I think about the problems that Team Fortress 2 has inherently, I just really need a hit. And also, sometimes I think about a potential sequel to the game. A sequel to Team Fortress 2 is like the golden goose. It's the pirate's treasure of the series. It has a lip-smacking amount of opportunity because it could literally be anything. It could fix all of the problems that Team Fortress 2 has and give us something new that we didn't even know that we wanted. Like, imagine if they added a new character who had a wheelchair with guns and no teeth because of a Mountain Dew addiction. That would be awesome. But while it is a lot of fun to speculate about a hypothetical Team Fortress 3, there is the very obvious elephant in the room. That being that Valve doesn't really do much with video games anymore, and they certainly don't do much with Team Fortress 2. Because this community drinks more lead paint than Gabe Newell does Diet Coke, there's probably already like 30 commenters saying, "Oh, but Team Fortress 3 is never gonna happen." An opinion of such depth and sharpness that literally everybody already knew that. But as a community, we do kind of have to admit that it is unlikely for Team Fortress 2 to get a sequel or a major patch or an overhaul or really anything like that. Now, I'm not gonna say for sure that it's never gonna happen. I mean, Valve is a company where the whims of the executive staff can cause things to just happen. Robin Walker could just wake up one day and say, "Hey, I want to make a Team Fortress thingamajig," and a Team Fortress thingamajig would probably get started. Probably not get finished, but it would at least get started. And I'm not gonna run around and act like I can predict the future, because the last time I did that, 39 people committed ritual suicide. However, there's sort of a secret about game development that not a lot of people really know, in that we don't actually need Valve at all. Turns out, and I'm just hearing about this, anyone can make a video game. Well, hold on now, everyone. There will be order in this council. But it's true, literally anybody can make a game, especially now that tools are easier to use than they've ever been. And you don't actually need Valve's permission to make a Team Fortress 3. I mean, you need their permission to call it Team Fortress 3 and to use their characters, but other than that, you don't need them for shit. And frankly, considering Valve's recent track record, I think people have a healthy amount of suspicion that they wouldn't be able to even do a good job if they were to make a game. Not necessarily because they can't, but because they just don't want to. Especially considering Counter-Strike's somewhat rushed transition between Source 1 and Source 2. But honestly, if Valve's not gonna do it, I don't care. Fuck them. If they want to, that's great, but we don't need a Team Fortress 3 if the Team Fortress 3 spiritual successor could be even better. But what would we even make? Obviously, it would have to be inspired by Team Fortress 2, so let's talk about what the lessons are I think we should learn from Team Fortress 2 if we were to make new games. So, let's get into it. The lessons learned from Team Fortress 2. First off, and this one's really obvious, Australians aren't people. Now, this one here is pretty fucking obvious. I mean, there's like a billion fucking videos about the results of this topic. But one of my favorite things about Team Fortress 2 is that it didn't make new characters. It just invested into the ones it already had. Now, mind you, there's nothing wrong with having a lot of characters. Some of my favorite fighting games have a lot of characters, and those characters are really deep. However, when it comes to simplistic characters like the ones in Team Fortress 2, who only have like 3 weapons and not much else, I think only having a limited number and focusing on them and giving each one of them new, unique playstyles rather than trying to branch those off into their own characters is a better idea. It's smart to find the minimum viable product, or in this case, the lowest number of characters you can get your game to be fun with, and then to advance from there, which is what Team Fortress did. However, you do always have to take the bad with the good, and now some of you might not fully understand what I just said, and for the layman in the audience, what I mean is that there are a lot of playstyles in Team Fortress 2 that I think are either missing, or which Valve started in some form and then abandoned, which is rather annoying, and also a lot of weapons that are just kind of awkward and have no real identity, mostly because they're missing another piece. Throwing bricks at Traffic Scout and SMG Sniper were never a completed loadout, even though they have pieces already in the game, and these misbegotten loadouts showcase some of the downsides of this philosophy. However, most of the time it was fine. Most weapons in this game weren't really designed with a specific loadout in mind. They were generally just designed with an idea or a very general playstyle, or they were just trying to do something really interesting and cool. And for the most part, but it is close, Team Fortress 2 weapons worked out pretty well. Attaching these new unlocks onto existing characters was also a really good idea. It gives players a lot of different customization and allows them to have emergent playstyles or strategies, and giving them lots of possibilities to experiment with. Of course, the downsides are unintended bad interactions like the Squirt Shot and the Phlogistonator, and the fact that when a game makes a new character, typically that character comes out like, complete. It's entirely possible for weapons in Team Fortress 2 to be almost awesome, missing a crucial partner that it just never gets. However, there are other flaws with this method. One issue is that you're kind of limited in your creativity. The more completely unique weapons that are unlike anything else in the game you add to a character, the less defined their identity becomes. This is why most Team Fortress 2 weapons are often just modifications of an original stock weapon, meaning that in many cases it still functions like the original character, but also differently. The only character in the game I would argue that can become unrecognizable is Demo Man, turning into Demo Knight, or if a Scout player gets his GED and realizes he just can't play Scout anymore. Aside from that, however, Team Fortress 2 makes a really good argument for keeping your roster small, and for just injecting them with new ideas instead of trying to split everything off into a new character. This is one of the things that I think Overwatch didn't really do as well as Team Fortress. Obviously, if we're talking about a potential Team Fortress 2 spiritual successor, you kind of have to talk about Overwatch. And while I will say that Overwatch had a lot of good ideas on paper for solving actual problems in Team Fortress, like making it so that your team didn't rely on a single healing character to be able to do stuff, not having so much of a reliance on Uber, and making it so that there's fewer characters per game, which cuts down on some of the chaos. A lot of characters in that game, however, were also relatively simple. Anytime Blizzard came up with a new function, it had to be added to the game as its own character, meaning that you ended up with all these little islands of functionality, and you would have to constantly give up characters you wanted to play in order to play characters you kind of needed. And like, before anyone says anything, I get that that's the point. That doesn't mean that I had fun. The fact that every character only had a few things to do also made it so that every matchup was really harsh. Cassidy versus Pharah, Soldier 76 versus Moira, and Bobby Kotick versus Consent. Harsh matchups exist in Team Fortress as well. Spy versus Pyro is not amazing at times, and Pyro versus Heavy is pretty much unwinnable unless you're a coward. But, and I'm sure some of you mouth breathers in the audience have already said this, new weapons and unlocks have softened these matchups, giving characters not just new, silly, and fun ways to play the game, but also more versatility and usefulness in different situations. There's a lot of times in something like Overwatch or in certain MOBAs where your character is just basically useless, either because the enemy team has a character that beats yours, like especially in MOBAs, or just because your character isn't good in a given situation because of the map or whatever. That doesn't happen as often with Team Fortress 2, partially again because they got different weapons and you can mix and match them as needed, but also because these different weapons are like actually very experimental and different. And honestly, that's another lesson with Team Fortress 2. Yeah, you just have to try stuff. And more importantly than just trying things, you have to admit when your game has a problem. If I had never confronted my Aunt Clara about her drinking problem, she never would have started meth. And Team Fortress 2's willingness to change its fundamentals was very important. 2007 Team Fortress 2 is terrible. Engineer, just for example, could not upgrade his dispenser or teleporter, and he couldn't even move his buildings. He had to destroy them and remake them whenever he wanted to move them. And there was also no air blast. It wasn't good. And being able to admit to and then fix these problems is pretty great. Especially back in the 2000s and the early 2010s, Team Fortress 2 was somewhat of a pioneer of this. If your game had major flaws like being made by Bethesda, you either had to hope that somebody could mod it, or that was it. You just had to deal with it, and maybe in the sequel things would be better. We'll get into the live service nature of Team Fortress 2 later, but if it weren't for these updates and major changes to how many classes play, these characters wouldn't be half as fun as they are now, or half as useful. Most of that flexibility comes from this next point. I swear to God, if the title card interrupts me, Yes, this is one of Team Fortress 2's best attributes in my opinion, its willingness to be both experimental and extreme with its designs. A lot of FPS games these days fill their arsenals up with just a bunch of different assault rifles that are all basically functionally the same thing, usually only differentiated by very minor differences in fire rate or damage or effective range or something like that, and are also be plagued by a complete unwillingness to do anything outside of the norm, and also whooping cough. When it comes down to the brass tacks of gameplay in a lot of these modern military shooters, the guns are all basically the same. They don't have enough meaningful differences to really change how you play. Now, of course, the communities for these kinds of games, which is a three-way Venn diagram between autistic trans femmes, veterans, and school shooters, are often too busy critiquing the reloading animations of guns they've never owned to make sure they're up to tip-top shape, to be able to tell whether or not they're having fun with the video game. When all the guns don't really have that many major differences, you're just gonna end up using the good one, or you're gonna have a pet one that you want to use just because it's your favorite. This has kind of gotten worse in the era of super customizable weapons, where you can now tack on 300 different attachments to every gun and basically get rid of any weaknesses that an individual one would have. The guns were already very similar, and then after you give them all the same exact attachments, they become even more so. Team Fortress 2, on the other hand, doesn't play that game. Weapons come as is. You can't modify them and get rid of the problems that you have with them. You have to take them as they are. Team Fortress 2 also doesn't have like single-digit modifications between weapons. Again, a lot of weapons in this game are just an altered version of a stock weapon. The scattergun and the backscatter are basically the same weapon in a lot of ways, but the different modifiers that Team Fortress 2 applies either give new weapons a completely different ability from the stock, or have some kind of very major change, like for example the direct hit with its 70% blast radius reduction on a weapon whose major advantage is blast radius, or the Patriot's Plinker, which deals 50% more damage but reduces your walk speed. People are going to notice a unique ability to heal yourself with your gun that no other weapon has, or if the gun has manufactured by Keltec, do not use will explode on it. See, now that's game design. Even in just like a very basic way, Team Fortress has a more interesting arsenal than a lot of other games, especially a lot of games that follow in Call of Duty's footsteps. Luckily, this is something that has begun to change in the 2020s. Thank fucking Christ. But let me just ask you a question. How many games have you played that have like the AK-74 or the M4 or the SCAR or whatever gun in them? It's probably at least a few. And I'm guessing these weapons in these games all function the same as well. Around 30 round magazine, maybe you can change that, select fire, decent out to medium range, etc, etc. Team Fortress 2 doesn't do any of that shit. Team Fortress 2 has crazy guns like rocket launchers, sticky bomb jumpers, and swords. Like, I don't need to explain this. It's just cool, crazy nonsense because crazy nonsense is cool. Games used to be filled with much more imaginative, interesting designs that played well into being an FPS game, rather than trying to ape the real function of real guns. Now, luckily, with the conclusion of the Omni Mega War, we have more games that are trying to do this now. Games like Titanfall, Fortnite, The Finals, etc. are making room for more interesting guns, which is worth every one of the 14 billion casualties. But still, Team Fortress is the king. And if we're lucky, maybe somebody will go for the throne, but honestly, I wouldn't bet on it. You know, you never really know what you have until it tries to take half of the inheritance, so you pay your friend Greg to go to their house and kill them. And wait, no, we settled out of court. I gotta call Greg. And man, does Team Fortress 2 make quite the argument for community servers. In fact, I would argue that outside of games that no longer have official servers, Team Fortress 2 is probably one of the best arguments for them on the planet. And it's a damn shame that we haven't really had this for a very long time, and also quite the relief that Roblox is doing as well as it is. Now, Roblox itself is terrible. It's basically just a pipeline for IP infringement and child rear. But one thing Roblox does that's really cool is it basically is a platform for games. It's not really a game in and of itself anymore. It's more like an engine and one-stop shop to be able to find the games. And this has inspired a lot of other developers, like for example Epic Games, to try to add more community ownership or modding into their game. And hopefully, if we're lucky, this change in focus could maybe result in us being allowed to own our own servers again. Oh wait, what's that? I'm receiving a special correspondent telegram from our newsroom. Let's see here. They say that that's just not going to happen. The benefits of which go without saying, but in case you either forgot or were never really around for this, community servers give you freedom. They allow you to tailor the game to your specific desires. They're also self-regulating, with real mod teams, typically, that function way better than any anti-cheat ever has. Yes, chat, what is your question? Yes, there is furry porn. There's also just the basic fact that community servers are better at actual community building. I don't mind random queuing in video games. Sometimes it's nice to just get into a game and play and compete with other people. But I will admit that I don't think I will probably ever add anyone I've randomly queued with in any game. The closest I ever got was Street Fighter V, and that's because that game's community was so small the entire thing was a community server. When there's millions of players and you meet like 20 of them for a match and then you never see them again because the probability of meeting with them once more is basically zero, you have one chance to add them to your friends list or you'll never meet them again. And it's very hard to stalk and rob people if you only have one opportunity to meet them. It's much easier if you have a common meeting place. But honestly, I wish Valve would go a step further. I kinda wish they would give us a little more control over this game, seeing as they don't seem to want it. I'd like to know exactly why some things in the workshop get in and others don't. I kinda wish they would allow us to submit other things like functional weapons, for example, or balance patch ideas, rather than just hats and now community fixes. Yeah, the word competitive is kryptonite to half of the Team Fortress 2 community. The very notion that two people could try to do the same thing and one of them be better at it plagues the ears of the kind of people who think Team Fortress 2 should just be about sitting in a corner and looking at stupid sprays. But to the chagrin of all the strawmen I just made up, Team Fortress 2 is a game that has a very competitive base, and which was updated with competitive integrity in mind, which is actually a good thing because competitive balancing or competitive changing is often the best way to do it. Turns out the things that work on the best players also work on the worst players, because that's how skill works. And Team Fortress 2 proves that you can still be a competitive game that thinks outside of the box and does interesting stuff. You just have to be willing to offend what people consider the status quo of your game, which in fairness is a dangerous gamble. Not as dangerous as coin flip Russian roulette, but still dangerous. Obviously, anything you do could really piss off your existing community. That's why it's best to design with the people who actually know what they're talking about in mind. However, tryhards aren't your only players. In fact, they're not even your most important ones. The most important players you have are the casuals, and it's important to make sure that casuals feel welcomed by your game. The thing is, right, is that tryhards and casuals aren't really that different. Inside of many casuals, there is a tryhard lurking around waiting for a match to engage them competitively, and everybody who is now a tryhard was once a casual, and these two groups of people aren't even inherently at odds. It's just that a healthy community has a lot of both, and hooking a more casual or less intensive player base into your game is not very difficult. Lower level or lower commitment players are very easy to please. All you need is this. Wait, no, not that. This. The dancing emote. The dancing emote is some of the best new player bait I think I've ever seen. First off, they are silly and goofy. They are just inherently enjoyable. They don't require any skill, you can't be bad at them, and they don't have any expectations. Arguably, the only harmful thing you do by dancing is waste a player slot, which in a game with 12 players on each side is not that big of a deal. Besides, most of you guys are a waste of a team slot anyway. Typically, when you're a new player, you're not very good at a video game, and when you're not very good at a video game, you're probably going to lose more often. Things like the dancing emotes, congas, high fives, etc. give new players something to do, something to fall back on when they get into a cycle of losing. It helps cut the tension, allowing you to interact with the game in some way that doesn't require you to be competitive or to be good at the game. Bad or inexperienced players need these islands to rest their feet so that they don't drown in the sea of mediocrity. Without it, there's nothing but competition, and if they have nothing but competition, something they're not good at in this game, they're just gonna lose a lot. And nobody wants to play a game where you don't do anything but lose. They already have that, it's called a job. But also, casual players don't just need an oasis from competition. They also need a way to interact with it in a meaningful way that they can understand. Now, this is not a TF2 thing, this is something every game with characters has done forever, way before Team Fortress 2 and way after. But having characters that are designed to be easier to play is a good thing. The best example of this being done well, at least in this game, is probably Soldier. Soldier, at his core, is very simple. However, Soldier, when you're playing him correctly, is way different and is much deeper and much more challenging, which is the good thing. Now, this is an ancient piece of wisdom at this point, but it has to be said once again because it's true. Did I leave my keys at the gas station? And also, the best kind of characters, or really the best things in any game, are things that are easy to pick up and play at a very basic level, but then have a lot of room for growth. Easy to start, hard to master. Team Fortress 2 was able to create characters that are easy to pick up, but had a lot of depth, mainly through two different philosophies. First off, it made characters simple. I mean, how many abilities does an individual character in Team Fortress 2 really have? Just looking at Pyro, for example, you have shoot primary, air blast, maybe, shoot secondary, and then swing with melee. Run around and jump. That's it. There's not not a lot to grasp here. Pretty much any brain-dead fart knocker could play this character, and in fact, that is the majority of the Pyro player base, but the second piece is the secret sauce. Team Fortress was designed by a bunch of competitive Quake heads. That is a fact. That is what Robin Walker and his friends were doing when they invented Team Fortress Quake. They were playing a lot of Quake and trying to get really good at it. And this is a good thing because people who try to get good at games are generally pretty good game designers to some degree, because they're always trying to learn more about a game. And the goobers that made Team Fortress 2 designed their game with a competitive but open mindset. This is, at least in my opinion, what directed them to come up with all of the weird little sub-mechanics and interesting interactions that this game has. These are the kinds of people who see a mechanic like Afterburn and ask themselves, are we playing with this in a way that makes it viable? And when they decide that they haven't, they add something like the flare gun. And stuff like the flare gun is what makes TF2 characters so deep. Pyro only has so many buttons, but because of the way his weapons work and because of mechanics like Air Blast, you have lots of other skills that you have to learn if you want to be good at him. Correct comboing, good positioning since you have no range, good Air Blast timing, how much glue you should eat daily based on your height-weight ratio, when you should try to commit to your extinguisher, stuff like that. Now that being said, that doesn't mean that every Team Fortress 2 character succeeded at this. In particular, Sniper and Heavy are kind of one note. And speaking of Sniper, yeah, this one's a real hot take here. Saying you don't like Sniper to Team Fortress 2 players is the easiest shit on the planet. It's like if you hosted a concert where the audience was nothing but Twitch streamers and you got up on stage, right, and you were like, "Who here likes scamming people?" Like, they're gonna go ballistic for this every time. But yes, Sniper is not particularly good. However, this isn't a Team Fortress 2 thing, and it's not just Sniper that's bad. In fact, Sniper, as far as snipers go, isn't that offensive. It's just that snipers in general are fucking stupid. Like, what sounds more fun to fight against? A high-flying, fast character with a really powerful weapon, or playing a game of find the pixel and also the guy has camouflage so he's the same color as all of the pixels, and if you don't find the right pixel in 3 seconds, you die. And it's not that the sniper problem is an unsolvable problem, it's just that FPS games seem to be very bad at applying good solutions. The major issue is this: players don't like it when they have to fight against somebody that they can't retaliate against because the other guy can outrange them. This is a thing in all games: MOBAs, fighting games, FPS games, street pistol dueling, and RTS games. Nobody wants to play against an opponent that can hit you further out than you can hit them. Again, especially if that distance is so great that you can't really hit them in a meaningful way back. FPS games in particular often exacerbate the issue by making it so that the map is gigantic, and by making sniper rifles not particularly hard to actually use. There are a variety of solutions to this issue, and different games deploy a lot of different things. For example, siege tanks in StarCraft are a unit that can be either a tank or an artillery piece. As an artillery piece, they have an extremely long range, like even farther than the unit itself can see, so you can use another unit in a completely different area to see for the siege tank. It shoots incredibly far away. That's how the CIA plans to kill Dua Lipa next year. However, there is a major flaw with siege tanks. They also have a minimum range where they can shoot at, meaning that if you can get a melee unit to tie one down, it can just kill it for basically free. And this is one of the most common counterbalances to long range that games deploy. They take a long range character and make them very weak at close range, or they're Dhalsim, or they're Happy Chaos, or they're Black Adam, and this is partially the route that they took for Sniper. Obviously, Sniper is not as good at short range as he is at long range, unless you're a very good shot. That being said, this doesn't really work unless the character in question is almost objectively bad at a close range. And also, even if you do this, it doesn't solve the problem that, again, you have to get into a close range in the first place, which is kind of hard when the other guy outranges you. Some games have tried adding things like lens blooms to show off where a sniper is if they're looking down their scope, but honestly, this doesn't really fix the issue. It does at least give you a heads up, and now you know where the sniper is so you can make better movements, but a lot of times it also just tells you where you got killed from. Some games also try things like adding bullet drop and bullet travel, but humans are generally pretty good at learning things, and they're often able to overcome these additional considerations. Some games also try making it so that every gun can pretty much shoot at any range, just some guns are better at it, or some guns lack a scope that allows you to effectively zoom in and see out that far, but since the modern game allows you to attach every single possible attachment onto every single fucking gun in one of 39 different spots, you can usually overcome the scope consideration. And in doing so, you've now created a second problem where everybody is now a tiny sniper, and you can just get shot at from across the map from any enemy. It sucks. Some games have tried some really experimental solutions. For example, Call of Duty Warzone added Nicki Minaj, who obviously should be able to distract any sniper that's looking at her, allowing the rest of her team to get through their sights, but obviously there's only so much she can do. The only games I've seen do these extremely long-range, pinpoint accurate weapons well are arena shooters. Arena shooters are fast as fuck, like super fast, like you run at the speed of a bullet. So hitting any target, especially with a super accurate weapon like a sniper rifle while they're going incredibly fucking fast, is really difficult. But games don't really like movement anymore. I mean, a little bit sometimes, but not like they used to. And when people don't move fast, it's a lot easier to hit them, especially when your gun just shoots a straight ray trace right where you want your mouse to go, and then also does a bazillion damage. And frankly, I just don't think we need snipers anymore unless games are going to change very fundamentally. And look, if you don't agree with me, that's fine. I just don't think it's that fun to play peekaboo with somebody from 600 yards away. I think FPS games are more fun when you're both right up in each other's face, jumping around and shooting at each other. Just get rid of them. And you know what, while you're at it, just get rid of people who like the coffin of Andy and Lele. Just hit him with a boulder. Oh boy, now I get to talk about the fun shit. In Sixes and in Highlander, like I said earlier, Medic is great. The actual character in a vacuum is fine, and in these formats where there's a fewer number of players, and you're guaranteed to have a Medic on your team, Medic is a lot of fun. However, for those of us who don't put down Roamer and our previous work experiences, Medic kind of sucks. In my opinion, I don't think any one character, in any game where you have multiple characters and are supposed to play them, should be as crucial to your success as Medic is. Medic is basically omnipotent. There is no situation where more than one medic is a bad idea. There is no alternative to having a medic. Every other source of healing just isn't the same. Dispensers can't move or overheal you. Stuff like the conch doesn't work half of the time and is also limited by how much damage you can do while it's active, and the same goes for stuff like Mad Milk. And the various passive sources of healing like the Cozy Camper are nowhere close to the efficacy of Medic, meaning that if you want to heal your team with any amount of efficiency, you need to have at least one Medic. And Medic opens up a whole can of worms of problems. Ubercharge is not a fun mechanic to deal with. There's very little counterplay unless your name is Pyro. While it does allow for lower skilled teams or teams who are losing to make a good comeback, the only reason they need to do that in the first place is because the maps in this game were designed by a fucking mole person who had never seen an outdoor environment, forcing blue team to use invincibility to get through all of the tiny little tunnels that they have to get through. And for every losing team that Ubercharge helps salvage, there's also a winning team that it helps snowball, especially considering you can chain multiple Ubers if you have multiple medics, at which point if your enemy team is alive, you fucked up. And at the very least in casual, Medic opens up some of the most degenerate strategies in the format. Uber Flog, overhealing snipers, pockets of pretty much any kind considering your team are all fucking brain dead and won't go for the medic. And also there's the Vaccinator. Just in case you weren't having enough problems with medic, now you can have 4 times as many. And that's just playing against medic. If you're playing on a team with a medic, or more importantly without a medic, it can be just as bad. There's nothing that says that medics can't just heal one person and ignore the entire team out of pure malice. There's also the problem that if nobody wants to play medic, which is fair because medic has a very specific playstyle that isn't really like other characters at all, then your team will go without a medic unless somebody just decides to sacrifice their fun and play him. One of the major advantages, in my opinion, of playing Team Fortress 2 is that it's a character-based game where you really never have to play a specific character. And of course, since it's TF2, the moment you connect, you're always the funniest person in the server. There are definitely times where counterplaying the enemy team, like if they have a bunch of scouts or something, so you go engineer, or filling in the gaps for your team is highly beneficial. But making an unoptimal pick in casual Team Fortress 2 is also something that isn't really that big of a deal. It's not as much of a travesty or throw as it can be in other games. There's no hard shutdown matches in this game. You're not throwing because you don't throw whatever character into the enemy team that they can't deal with right now. The only time where you're making a seriously flawed decision at character select is if there's some kind of ridiculous composition on the enemy team that has a massive Achilles heel, and we're talking like multiple players on the enemy team, not just they have this one guy, so play this other guy who beats him, or not picking a medic if you don't have one. This is something that Overwatch actually fixed by enforcing at least 2 supports per team, and also making it so that supports had a wider array of playstyles. Sure, I don't think any individual support in Overwatch is as good as medic is pound for pound, but there are a lot of characters I'd rather play in that game than I would play medic. And of course, that is a matter of preference, but in a game like Team Fortress 2, where characters are so versatile and there's so many decent or corrected decisions when it comes to your choice, I think having one character that your team just needs, whether or not you would like it, is inherently more flawed. And it's not like they really improved medic either. The only major change medic ever got was different meta guns, one of which is actively making the game worse, and the other other two are just simply not as good, and the Crusader's crossbow, probably one of the best weapons added to any character in this game's history. But the crossbow only does so much, and frankly, if somebody out there were to make a Team Fortress 2 killer, like a real one, for the love of God, either have multiple ways to play medic, or just make it so we don't need to play medic. Spread the healing out among other characters. He's a great character on his own, but I think he causes more pain than he does relief. Unless you look at the fanfiction, then there's a lot of relief going on. Oh, and maybe make it so you can't just build Uber by doing nothing. And frankly, while there are other lessons to be learned, like don't make all of your maps a tube and let people have cool movement, those are also really good ideas for other videos, so I'm probably gonna do that. Thank you all very much for watching. That's been me for now, but I will be back shortly. And once again, I appreciate all of you who actually stick to the end of the video. Oh, and one last extremely important piece of information that it would be a darn shame if got comedically interrupted